Human beings have always been fascinated by understanding themselves. From ancient philosophers to modern neuroscientists, we have constantly tried to decode why people think the way they think, feel the way they feel, and behave the way they behave. Psychology emerged from that curiosity. It attempts to explain the invisible forces that guide our actions or emotions, beliefs, habits, fears, motivations, and unconscious patterns. However, as psychology became popular in books, social media, and everyday conversations, many simplified ideas about human behavior started spreading. These ideas sound convincing, but they are often incomplete, exaggerated, or simply incorrect. Over time, they turn into psychological myths, beliefs about human behavior that feel true but do not actually reflect how the mind works. The human brain naturally seeks simple explanations. Truths. When people hear a psychological explanation that seems logical or relatable, they often accept it without questioning it. This is how myths about human behavior begin. A single observation becomes a general rule. A partial truth becomes an absolute belief. Simplified concept spreads faster than a nuanced scientific explanation. Over years, these myths become deeply embedded in culture. People start interpreting their own experiences and the behavior of others through these flawed lenses. This is why understanding psychological myths is not just an academic exercise. It is essential for understanding ourselves and others more accurately. Many people unknowingly build their self-image, relationships, and decisions based on these myths. They judge others incorrectly, misunderstand emotional reactions, sometimes even damage their own mental well-being because they believe something about psychology that is simply not true. When we remove these myths, we begin to see human behavior in a far more realistic, compassionate, and intelligent way. The mind is not as simple as popular psychology often suggests. It is layered, adaptive, emotional, rational, irrational, and constantly evolving. One of the most common myths about human behavior is the belief that people always reveal their true personality through small signals like body language or quick reactions. Many people believe that if someone crosses their arms, avoids eye contact, or speaks in a certain tone, it immediately exposes their true intentions or personality. In reality, human behavior is far more context-dependent than that. A person might cross their arms because they are cold, not because they are defensive. Someone might avoid eye contact because they are shy, tired, or culturally conditioned. To show respect that way, human behavior cannot be interpreted like a simple code where one gesture equals one meaning. Psychologists understand that behavior is influenced by multiple layers at once. There are internal emotional states, environmental pressures, social expectations, personality traits, past experiences, and immediate circumstances, all interacting together. When a person displays a certain behavior, it is not necessarily a direct reflection of their true character. Instead, it may be a temporary adaptation to the situation they are in. For example, someone who appears quiet in a group may be perceived as insecure or socially anxious. But the same person might be confident and expressive among close friends. The difference is not personality, it is psychological safety. This is why psychologists pay attention not just to isolated behaviors, but to patterns across time and situations. If a person consistently withdraws from conversations, avoids expressing opinions, and shows physical tension in social environments, then it may suggest deeper anxiety or fear of judgment. But if that same behavior appears only in unfamiliar environments, it may simply reflect a natural adjustment process. Humans constantly regulate their behavior depending on where they are and who they are with. Interestingly, the absence of a behavior can also reveal something important psychologically. If someone never expresses anger, never disagrees, and always tries to appear calm and agreeable, it may not necessarily mean they are emotionally balanced. Sometimes it indicates emotional suppression. People who suppress anger often fear conflict or rejection. Over time, this suppression can create internal stress because the brain is constantly filtering emotions instead of processing them. Emotional suppression may look like maturity on the surface, but internally, it can lead to anxiety, resentment, or emotional exhaustion. Another powerful psychological myth is the belief that human beings are primarily rational decision makers. Many people assume that when someone makes a choice, whether about relationships, careers, or everyday actions, it is based on logic and careful thinking. In reality, much of human behavior is driven by emotions, subconscious biases, and mental shortcuts. The brain evolved not just to think, but to survive. Survival requires quick judgments, emotional signals, and instinctive responses. For example, when people choose friends or partners, they often believe they are selecting based on rational qualities such as compatibility or shared goals, but psychological research shows that familiarity, emotional comfort, childhood attachment patterns, and subconscious associations play a huge role. Someone might feel strongly drawn to a person without fully understanding why. That attraction may come from subtle psychological similarities with early caregivers or past emotional experiences. The same emotional influence appears in everyday decision-making. Imagine someone deciding whether to apply for a new job opportunity. The opportunity might offer higher income, career growth, and long-term benefits. Yet the person may hesitate or avoid applying. This hesitation is not purely rational. It often reflects deeper psychological factors such as fear of failure, fear of change, or fear of losing familiar stability. The mind frequently prioritizes emotional safety over logical advantage. Interestingly, when people later explain their decisions, they tend to create rational explanations to justify choices that were originally emotional. This is known as rationalization. The brain prefers to see itself as logical and consistent, so it builds explanations after the decision has already been made. This creates the illusion that we are more rational than we truly are. Another widespread myth is the belief that confident people never experience fear or self-doubt. Society often portrays confidence as a permanent personality trait that some people naturally possess, while others lack. In reality, confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act despite fear. Even highly successful individuals regularly experience uncertainty and self-doubt. The difference lies in how they interpret and respond to those feelings. When a person avoids challenges because they feel unsure of themselves, it often indicates that their self-worth is strongly tied to outcomes. They fear that failure will define their value as a person. This creates a protective behavior where the mind avoids situations that might expose vulnerability. On the other hand, when someone takes risks despite uncertainty, it usually reflects psychological resilience. They understand that mistakes and discomfort are part of growth rather than proof of inadequacy. Psychologists often observe subtle behavioral signals when studying confidence. Confident individuals are not necessarily the loudest or most dominant people in a room. Instead, they tend to show behavioral flexibility. They can listen without feeling threatened, admit when they are wrong, and adapt to feedback. This flexibility indicates internal security. In contrast, someone who constantly tries to appear dominant or always needs to prove themselves may actually be compensating for deeper insecurity. A fourth myth about human behavior is the belief that people's personalities remain completely fixed throughout life. Many individuals believe that if someone is shy, anxious, impulsive, or pessimistic, that is simply their permanent nature. This belief ignores one of the most powerful truths discovered by modern psychology and neuroscience: the human brain is highly adaptable. This adaptability is known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity means that the brain can reorganize its structure and connections based on experiences, learning, and repeated behaviors. When people repeatedly practice new ways of thinking or responding, their neural pathways gradually change. This is why therapy, education, habit building, and personal growth practices can transform behavior over time. For example, a person who has spent years believing they are socially awkward may avoid conversations and social gatherings. This avoidance reinforces anxiety because the brain never receives evidence that social interaction can be safe or enjoyable. However, if the person gradually exposes themselves to small social experiences and learns new communication skills, their brain slowly adjusts. Confidence grows not because their personality magically changed, but because their neural patterns evolved through experience. When psychologists analyze behavioral change, they pay attention to triggers and reinforcement patterns. Every behavior is influenced by what happens before it and what happens after it. If a behavior reduces discomfort or brings a reward, the brain becomes more likely to repeat it. This reinforcement process shapes habits and personality traits over time. Understanding these patterns allows psychologists to help individuals reshape behaviors that once seemed permanent. Another common myth is the belief that strong emotions like sadness, anger, or anxiety are signs of weakness or psychological instability. Many cultures teach people to suppress emotional expression in order to appear strong. But from a psychological perspective, emotions are not weaknesses. They are signals. They provide information about needs, boundaries, threats, and values. When a person feels anger, it often signals that a boundary has been crossed. When someone feels sadness, it may indicate loss or unmet emotional needs. Anxiety frequently appears when the brain perceives uncertainty or potential danger. These emotions evolve to guide attention and behavior. The problem arises not from feeling emotions, but from misunderstanding or suppressing them. People who suppress emotions for long periods often develop psychological strain. The brain continuously processes emotional information even when a person tries to ignore it. Suppressed emotions may reappear in indirect ways, such as irritability, fatigue, physical tension, or sudden emotional outbursts. Psychologists sometimes observe that individuals who appear calm on the surface carry significant internal stress because they rarely allow themselves to process emotions openly. Conversely, individuals who can acknowledge and express emotions tend to regulate them more effectively. Emotional awareness allows the brain to integrate experiences rather than store them as unresolved tension. This does not mean expressing emotions impulsively or aggressively. Healthy emotional expression involves recognizing feelings, understanding their sources, and communicating them constructively. When psychologists analyze emotional behavior, they look at patterns of expression, avoidance, and regulation. They observe how people react under stress, how quickly they recover from setbacks, and how they interpret emotional experiences. Emotional resilience is not about eliminating negative emotions. It is about navigating them without losing psychological balance. These myths about human behavior create many hidden consequences in everyday life. When people believe that body language reveals absolute truth, they may misjudge others and damage relationships through incorrect assumptions. When individuals believe humans are purely rational, they may criticize themselves harshly for emotional decisions rather than understanding the deeper influences behind them. When society portrays confidence as fearlessness, people who experience normal self-doubt may believe something is wrong with them. These misunderstandings also affect mental health. People who think personality cannot change may feel trapped by their habits or insecurities. Those who see emotions as weakness may suppress feelings until they accumulate into anxiety or burnout. Psychological myths create unrealistic expectations about how the human mind should function. Relationships are especially influenced by these misconceptions. When partners assume that certain behaviors always mean the same thing, they may misinterpret intentions. A quiet partner might be seen as disinterested when they are actually overwhelmed or tired. A partner who asks for reassurance might be labeled insecure when they are simply seeking emotional connection. Misinterpretation of behavior often creates unnecessary conflict because people react to assumptions rather than understanding underlying emotional needs. Psychologists address these challenges by studying behavior in a systematic and observational way. They do not rely on single moments or isolated gestures. Instead, they analyze patterns across time, environments, and relationships. They examine how individuals respond to stress, how they communicate emotions, and how their beliefs influence actions. This broader perspective allows them to distinguish between temporary reactions and deeper psychological patterns. One method psychologists use is behavioral observation. This involves carefully watching how individuals interact with their environment and other people. Subtle details such as tone of voice, response timing, facial expressions, and posture can reveal emotional states, but only when interpreted within context. Psychologists also pay attention to inconsistencies between what people say and how they behave. These inconsistencies often reveal internal conflicts or subconscious motivations. Another important technique is analyzing thought patterns. The way people interpret events strongly influences their emotional reactions. Two individuals can experience the same situation but interpret it completely differently. One person might view criticism as an opportunity to improve, while another sees it as proof of personal failure. These interpretations shape confidence, motivation, and resilience. Psychologists also examine emotional triggers. Certain experiences activate strong emotional responses because they connect to past memories or unresolved fears. For example, a person who grew up in a highly critical environment may react strongly to even mild feedback. The emotional intensity does not come from the current situation alone, but from accumulated past experiences stored in the brain. Subconscious signs also play a role in behavioral analysis. People often reveal internal emotions through microexpressions, hesitation, speech patterns, or subtle physical movements. However, psychologists avoid simplistic interpretations. Instead of assuming that one gesture equals one emotion, they consider multiple signals and the broader psychological context. Understanding the truth about human behavior requires patience and curiosity. The mind is not a machine that follows fixed rules. It is a dynamic system shaped by biology, experience, culture, relationships, and personal meaning. Every person carries a unique psychological story that influences how they see the world and how they respond to it. When we stop believing psychological myths, we begin to approach human behavior with greater empathy and intelligence. Instead of judging someone based on a single action, we consider the complexity behind it. Instead of expecting ourselves to be perfectly rational or fearless, we recognize that emotions and uncertainty are natural parts of being human. This perspective does not make behavior easier to predict, but it makes it far more understandable. Ultimately, psychology is not about labeling people or simplifying their actions into neat categories. It is about exploring the rich and complicated processes that shape thoughts, emotions, and choices. Every behavior has a story behind it. Every reaction carries layers of meaning built through years of experience. When we look beyond myths and examine those layers carefully, we gain not only knowledge about the human mind, but also a deeper understanding of ourselves and the people around us. And perhaps the most powerful realization is this: human behavior is not fixed, not perfectly logical, and not always transparent. But it is remarkably adaptable, deeply emotional, and endlessly capable of growth. The moment we stop believing oversimplified myths about psychology is the moment we begin seeing human nature more clearly, more compassionately, and more truthfully.